Hello, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec podcast. And today we'll be talking about replacements. I've got this topic on my mind because if you've been following the news, Israel seems to be really trying to see how good Hezbollah is at replacing its heads of terror. And all the articles I'm seeing are about how hard it's going to be to replace all of these people who are very, very good at being jihadists. And that got me to thinking about how do we look at replacements in our hopefully non-terror companies. And we've seen that terrorists can replace themselves, but I think that in tech it's a lot easier than we even imagine. A lot of the times when I'm working with founders or early executives in startups, they seem to think that they are special snowflakes. There can't be anyone else to replace them. The real story is I've seen so many of them eventually leaving companies, being replaced, and seeing what happens in the wake. And you'd be surprised to hear that I'm guessing 98% of the companies don't close the week after, right? They seem to manage and get by. It might be a hit, it might not be. But essentially, all of us are replaceable, and we need to keep that in mind. I think it's especially important for you when you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling like you always have to be there, you cannot rely on anyone else to do stuff, or you feel like you can't take vacation, you can't take some time off, you can't leave the office early. All of these things are in your head or up to you. It's up to you to decide that you want an organization that doesn't depend on you so heavily, because there's no reason for it to be that way. Once you've grown past a handful of people where genuinely every missing person takes out a major chunk of the workforce, there's no real reason to let that be the situation. You can decide that you want to have an organization that's much more independent, capable, autonomous, that doesn't rely on you always being there in arm's reach. And to get there, first of all, think about how much do you trust the people reporting to you? Have you grown them to the point where they are real leaders, or are they just glorified managers, people who have nice titles but essentially don't have a lot of responsibility, don't have enough authority, always have to come up to you to get anything signed off? They don't have the ability to make anything by themselves. They always have to ask for permission, just like 10-year-olds who think they're really big but still have to tell you whenever they do anything. I don't think that's what you want to do. However, I've seen so many companies where that is the case, and even the middle managers who are in this situation don't even comprehend the fact that they are in this weird situation where they're not getting the autonomy they ought to be getting. And I've seen unicorns where this is the situation. The entire VP team is constantly complaining about how overwhelmed they are and they cannot trust anyone in middle management. And I'm like, hey, you know who got these middle managers into the office? Who's in charge of coaching them for the past years? You guys. So how about you change how you work and stop thinking you're so irreplaceable and realize that you are replaceable and help be replaceable, at least for the amount of time that you need in order to remain sane. So you need to do that. Second, I want you to also consider whether you're looking at some key people in your organization as irreplaceable. I've seen executives who had this fear of losing the first employee, for example, because that person was so critical, so important, knew every line of code, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I've seen, again, all the companies in the world lose that person eventually and remain there. If you thought that the 4,000 engineers in Twitter were irreplaceable once they were all laid off or quit, and the company is down to 20% or less of what it had, the company is still there. We're all still using it, whether we should or not, but it is working. Everything is replaceable. You just need to set your mind correctly and think about it. So yes, some people might be very, very good. They might have a lot of positive impact, but you should not be so afraid of the situation of what would happen should they leave. No, you shouldn't be bending yourself backwards just to ensure that that person stays, regardless of the price the rest of the organization has to pay. No, always have an alternative in mind and be comfortable with knowing that eventually everyone leaves. And lastly, I want you to think about what does it mean to succeed too much? And this is a disclaimer that I think probably 97% of those of you listening have quite a ways off till that becomes the target threat. But I've seen people who worked so keenly to be replaceable, to allow themselves to take vacations and time off, to the point where they structured this noodle organization where they had essentially one person reporting to them, and that person was in charge of everyone. And I've seen that where I had a CTO with a VP under them, or a VP with a director under them that essentially took responsibility of the entire organization under them. And then they became replaceable to the fact that no one really needed them. They were just another layer in the organization, just adding overhead. Don't create that unless your intention is to leave and you're structuring the organization to actually survive without you. But be mindful in how you're creating this autonomy under you. Time has this weird ability to get sucked up immediately. Whenever you delegate something to people under you, the time you just saved oftentimes gets drained immediately into something else. You need to be proactive and decide how you're going to be using your time. If you're delegating, if you're hiring someone under you, think about what is the purpose? What do you want to do with that time? What should it enable? That will help you decide what are the sorts of stuff you need to delegate, who are the right people to hire so you can delegate that to them, and ensure that you're not becoming a useless leader who essentially is just overhead, but being replaceable exactly where it counts so you can focus your attention and your efforts where you're going to be delivering the highest ROI for the organization. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. If you're not finding this podcast replaceable, I'll be here next week as well. And if you want to get some more content, check out the show notes where you're going to get my YouTube channel with like 2 new vids a week. I'm doing a bunch of experiments. And also check out my newsletter, 1 article every week. Thank you. See you next week.